a survey that will be posted online as well. And we hope that you are able to either join us for more of this discussion through the survey and also through future public meetings. And so without further ado, I will introduce Gaston Concardly to talk to us oh, by the way, we will be having Q&A. And so if you do have any questions throughout the meeting, please be sure to drop that information into the chat or raise your hand, and we'll be calling on throughout the meeting. We'll have different breakout sessions and panel, so the panelists can discuss some of the questions. And so be sure to drop your questions into the chat. And again, now I will call on Gus Concardly to give us a little brief intro into tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Hortensia, and good evening, everyone. My name is Gus Concardly. I'm the Director of the Department of Transportation for the City of Dallas. And I want to thank you for being here this evening, and a special thanks to those who have contributed to the process as we work towards drafting the first Vision Zero action plan for the City of Dallas. This is a major undertaking for us at the city level, but cannot be done without the participation of our partners and input from the public. So Vision Zero is a traffic safety strategy that seeks to eliminate all traffic fatalities while increasing safe, healthy, and equitable mobility for all. In 2019, the Dallas City Council set a goal of eliminating traffic fatalities and cutting severe injuries in half by 2030. The Dallas Department of Transportation is leading the development of the Vision Zero plan by collaborating with other city departments and local agencies, as well as through the collection of public feedback and priorities for improving traffic safety through engineering, enforcement, education, and evaluation and equity. Again, this is a great effort, and the effort of those who have contributed, whether being on within the City of Dallas, our partnering agencies, and our stakeholders. It is important. It takes all of us to contribute to this plan to make it successful. And as such, again, thank you all for being here and for contributing to this effort. And now I will invite our Chief Planner, Ms. Catherine Rush, to begin the presentation. Catherine?
Thank you, Gus. So just to go over what today's presentation is going to cover, I'm going to start with just an intro to Vision Zero and the action plan, and talk a little bit about the state of traffic safety in Dallas before taking a brief break and opening it up to our panel for some Q&A. Then we'll be diving into the focus areas that were identified for the action plan based on a data analysis and our first public survey. Then we'll have another short break and Q&A, and then discuss the draft recommendations that are going to be in the action plan, and then finally Q&A and next steps. So Vision Zero is a vision of zero fatalities. It's a recognized strategy based on data and proven methods to eliminate or at least significantly reduce traffic fatalities. And it's based on the belief that no loss of life is acceptable as a price for mobility, and that all traffic fatalities and severe injuries are preventable, that they are not accidents, that they can be prevented. And it is a comprehensive 5 E's approach of engineering, enforcement, education, evaluation, and equity. So it's not about preventing collisions, it's about preventing deaths and severe injuries. And it's about not expecting people to be perfect, because that's just not how people operate. So we need to integrate human failing into our approach to safety to ensure that people can have mobility and get to where they want to go without being at risk for their lives and safety. So to take a little step back and focus in on Dallas. The City Council back in 2019 adopted a resolution committing the city to a goal of 0 fatalities and 50% fewer injuries by 2030. So, and now that would be 9 years' time. It also directed the city manager to develop an action plan for how we're going to get there by the end of this year, to convene a task force, and it directed city departments to participate in the development of the action plan. So here's a little bit of information on our scope of work. The general tasks are shown at the top. So that included a crash data analysis with a survey, research into best practices, a review of existing programs and best practices, drafting recommendations, and finalizing the plan. So we are currently at the public input phase 2 stage of this. And we have a survey that will actually be open through December 3rd. So what has been guiding this effort is a Vision Zero task force made up of many city departments as well as external agencies listed here. And we've convened subcommittees for engineering enforcement and education. So now a little bit of information about the current state of traffic safety in Dallas. So Dallas has the second highest traffic fatality rate. So that is deaths per 100,000 people among the 15 most populous cities. So most of the other major Texas cities are listed on here, and as you can see, they're a lot lower on the list. So Dallas's rate is 14.11. The next highest Texas city is Fort Worth, and it's only 10.8. And so that indicates through data that a traffic fatality is 1.3 times more likely to occur in Dallas than in Fort Worth. So I think sometimes to an extent people say, you know, Texas, everything's bigger in Texas, but here in Dallas, there is something unique that's been going on, and that deserves special attention. And so even when you account for population increase, Dallas's traffic fatality rate has increased, while the national rate has remained relatively flat. So even when you account for our increasing population, the fatality rate has increased. And compared to 2010, our numbers have increased by 80%. So in 2020, 222 people died as a result of traffic collisions in Dallas. So now we're going to open it up for a little bit of discussion. I think, Wayne, you want to take it over?
Yeah, so the, excuse me. So our first question is going to be for Courtney. And so far we've heard a lot of numbers. So what do these numbers look like from your perspective and from the hospital's perspective? So how do these severe crashes impact people and their families?
Yeah, so I am a nurse by training, and I am a trauma nurse by training. And one of the things that we know, and from working in the emergency room in the trauma resus bay, is the best treatment for injuries after motor vehicular trauma, such as a motorcycle crash or a car crash or getting hit while walking across the street, is not in what I can do downstairs in the trauma resus space, but it's really through preventing the event from happening and keeping you as safe as possible. And that's where we work very hard on these kind of efforts, in addition to taking care of patients, because every weekend I come to work, we're telling family members that their loved ones are having devastating injuries or may not survive this event. And that's a part of my job that I don't like, and would very much be happy to give up because of the efforts that are going on here in the city of Dallas to make things safer for us to live and work and play and enjoy our communities.
Absolutely, absolutely. And just so one other just follow-up kind of or separate question, but so are there any public health benefits for making roadways safer for all modes of traffic? Or in other words, so beyond safety, are there other benefits to creating a safer transportation system, not just for motorists, but for pedestrians and cyclists as well?
Beyond us eliminating injuries and broken legs and internal injuries, yeah, there's things that we can do from saving dollars, everything comes down to dollars. Dollars are so important. And so if we can keep your cars from having significant car crashes, then we can keep you from those dollars, from healthcare dollars, from the city dollars, for those injuries that can come into play with that. From a happiness standpoint, from being comfortable in your environment, and happy with where you live and happy with the areas surrounding you. I think all of that are also important things that we can look at and metrics that we could consider when we're trying to figure out what's best for our city moving forward.
Thank you so much.
All right. Well, I will dive back into it. Thank you so much, Courtney. Okay, so we identified with the task force focus areas for the Vision Zero action plan. And these are the factors and locations that account for the highest percentage of fatal and severe crashes in Dallas and are intended to be a focus for and sort of guide and provide the framework for the Vision Zero action plan. The focus areas were identified through a crash data analysis and through the public survey that was available over the summer of 2021, and with additional input from the Vision Zero task force. And in fact, some of the targeted areas are currently in the process of being addressed through various programs, such as the Texas Department of Transportation's Highway Safety Improvement Program. So first, we're going to start with our topic focus areas. These are the factors that account for the highest percentage of fatal and severe crashes in Dallas. So one is speeding and unsafe travel speeds, which just purely based on police crash reports is present in 19% of crashes. Pedestrians are present in 36% of fatal and severe injury crashes, even though they only account for a small percentage of the way in which people get around in Dallas. Left turn crashes are in 10% of our severe crashes. Red light running is 10%. Driving under the influence, whether that is drug or alcohol, is 14% of crashes. Not using proper restraints, so that includes things like not wearing a seatbelt, not using a car seat, is in 16% of crashes. And our Office of Data Analytics determined that a person is 10% has a significantly greater chance of being in a fatal crash if they're not wearing a seatbelt, or of the crash being fatal if they're not wearing a seatbelt compared if they are. And then finally, distracted driving. Based on police crash reports, this was only in 5% of the fatal and severe injury crashes. However, it was the second highest priority in our public survey after speeding and unsafe travel speeds. So it was determined and supported by our task force to be included as a topic focus area. Next, moving on to the geographic focus areas. So first is our high injury network, and so HIN for short. And what this is those streets where a disproportionate number of severe crashes occurred. So in Dallas, this map, the gray lines, shows the 8% of streets, and these are non-freeways, that account for 60% of severe crashes. So a fewer number of streets accounts for 60% of severe crashes. However, that 8% of streets is still over 2,000 lane miles of streets. So, so to provide a starting point for the Vision Zero action plan, the task force agreed that it would be important to identify some high priority corridors for at least the initial 1 to 2 years of focus for the plan. And so these are the streets that have the highest fatal and severe crashes per mile, with additional weighting for equity focus areas. And then also the high priority intersections. These are the top 50 intersections for fatal and severe injury crashes. However, that is not to say that those should be the only locations where improvements should be focused. So severe crashes often seem to happen randomly. I think that's, kind of how it's reported in the news as sort of accidents, but the circumstances in which severe crashes occur, while the crashes themselves might be random, the circumstances are usually fairly predictable. And so what we just showed on the past few slides were what you kind of would call a hotspot analysis, and that helps us prioritize locations where severe crashes have happened in the past. A systemic safety analysis helps us identify locations that should be addressed system-wide to prevent crashes in the future. And so here's how we do this. So we've already selected our focus crash types or topic areas. So for example, left turn crashes. Next, and this is based on a model by the Federal Highway Administration, the next step is to identify our focus facilities. So for left turn crashes, a significant proportion of them happen on divided roads, particularly 6-lane divided roads, and particularly at signalized intersections. So from there, we would want to identify what countermeasures can be used to target left turn crashes and then try to apply them system-wide at signalized intersections on 6-lane roads. But if we're going to do it system-wide, that's where the low-cost piece becomes important. But this is all to say that just because an area is not on the high injury network doesn't mean that it's not still a safety priority. All right, so before we do a deep dive into the draft recommendations, I'm going to go back for a little bit more Q&A. So Wayne, I think you have some more questions.
I do. So first one is going to be for Assistant Chief Ramirez. So we've heard a little bit about what these severe crashes look like from a medical, from a healthcare standpoint. But what about the standpoint of DPD officers? So like, how do you guys see the different types of crashes listed in the focus areas, like red light running or failure to yield, as being key contributors to fatal and severe crashes?
Hi. Yeah, I think that's a good question. So when we look at our crash data, one of the contributors that we see most often is speed, and when we saw that during the pandemic. I think that was where we in 2020 we knew we had fewer people on the roads. There were fewer people commuting to work or to school, but yet we saw a pretty consistent number of either severe injury or fatality injury wrecks on the freeway. And so, at first glance, it's really unusual. There's fewer people on the road, so why are we having so many accidents that are resulting in fatalities? And so the highest contributor, the factor that was the highest contributor was speed. And so we could theorize all day about, well, if there's fewer people on the road, are you able to increase your speed, or is it more a product of people running late? In some of those, we don't get the answers to. Some of the witnesses may not know. People who are involved in wrecks may not give us the specifics of what exactly they were doing right before they got to the wreck. But we knew that speed was consistently one of the highest factors. So I think that's probably something that, while that I think there's a lot of opportunity to gain ground on, because when we talk about just creating awareness and maybe campaigns to bring awareness to our community and just monitoring the speeds limits and knowing that through our medical professionals how much more significant the injury would be just based on 5 or 10 miles over the speed limit. I think those things could be eye openers to the community, and they're definitely something worth initiating that campaign and sharing that information with. I think it would help, and I think if we can message it correctly and get it to the schools, I think teenagers are newer behind the wheel and don't always know they can't negotiate distances and turns like some of us more experienced drivers. So I think we can start to fine tune that message and where we deliver that message, and I think we can see some real returns.
Yeah, and that's a really good segue to the next question that I have is it's going to be for Emma, and just from your perspective with Mothers Against Drunk Driving, could you talk a little bit more about why driving under the influence, particularly by young people, is so dangerous, and why it's so important to educate young people about safe driving?
Yes, absolutely. It is very dangerous. Statistics tell us that, drivers between 16 to 20 are 17 times more likely to die in a car crash. And when it comes to impaired driving, there's a phrase that we use in our teen presentation and in our parent presentation, and that it's biology, not maturity. So for instance, so what does that mean? Why does biology have to do with impaired driving for teens? So their brain is still developing, and it doesn't finish developing until mid-20s. And we've learned through research, when they drink alcohol or smoke marijuana, do drugs, that it has long-lasting negative effects on those learning and memory functions. And now we all know that driving a car is a divided attention task. And so it's already difficult. And because our teenage brains are still developing, those teens tend to make more of an emotional choice than a logical choice. And so when you add alcohol and drugs in that, it makes it even harder. And so we've learned through our research, when they drink alcohol, do drugs, they actually engage in more risky behaviors, such as like driving 20 miles over the speed limit, or running red lights, or making illegal turns. And so in our program, and throughout this task force, our goal is to educate those teens, not because they know that it's wrong. They know that it's illegal. So our goal is to educate them why, how does it affect them, and then techniques on how to be prepared when they are in that situation, so they can make that good choice and have a plan to get home safe. And we do the same thing in our parent program, and how to help parents start those conversations, so that way they can work together, parent and teen, and then that way they both have a plan in place before their teen goes out. So.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much.
All right, Hortensia, before I dive back in, do we have any quick questions from the chat or anything?
We do not have any questions yet, but please be sure to drop them in the chat if you do have any questions. After the next breakout session, we'll also be taking some live questions if you want to speak on anything. But for now, please drop your questions into the chat. Thank you.
All right, now time to dive into the recommendations. And so I apologize, the next slides are going to be a little text heavy, but there's a lot of important information to cover. And so we really had a hard time cutting any of the information, but just there's gonna be a lot of text. So first, overall themes for the recommendations. Number one is to work across departments and agencies to take a well-rounded, comprehensive approach using the 5 E's. Next is using data to determine priorities for improving safety. 3 is managing speeds to safe levels. And so that means not, going 20 miles or less in school zones or anywhere you're around pedestrians, and just being context sensitive about speeds, but managing speeds through engineering studies that incorporate local conditions, directing engineering enforcement education and evaluation, resources to high injury and fatal crash hotspot locations, and then finally creating a culture of safety within the city and the public at large. Okay, so now we're going to go into a series of categories of recommendations. So starting with engineering, and then we're going to be going to enforcement, evaluation, education, equity. So engineering, some things that we're already doing include adding backplates with retroflective or borders to traffic signal heads. So you might see these as you're going through signalized intersections. They're on the signal heads, and it's kind of a yellow reflective outline to the traffic signal heads to make them more visible. City Council has increased funding for pavement markings in this year's budget to refresh markings every 3 years. We are converting streetlights to LED, implementing Complete Streets projects, implementing priorities in the Sidewalk Master Plan, and seeking funding to upgrade signals at high crash locations. So now on to draft recommendations, and two for engineering, that includes infrastructure improvements, so physical improvements to our roadways and pedestrian and bicycle facilities. So number one is to conduct an engineering safety evaluations for an average of 10 miles of high priority streets on the Hindrey network annually, with the goal of addressing the top 50 miles on the Hindrey network in 5 years. And so for Dallas, that would be a huge improvement, but also, but also still a drop in the bucket. So that's where we have these other items. So implement low cost, high impact safety improvements at 50 intersections and corridors on the Hindrey network, and establish a pipeline of capital projects and seek funding. And starting in 2023, strive to implement an average of 5 major projects annually. So to talk about what are the low cost improvements that we want to start implementing immediately, and some examples of what capital improvements might be. Low cost are typically those that we can do with internal staff, or that cost about like for sure less than $100,000. So that's things like those reflective back plates, that's things like lighting, traffic signal improvements, and small amounts of things with concrete. Capital improvements are those things that require major signal changes, or new signals that require a lot of new concrete, things like that. So that's where we have options like pedestrian hybrid beacons, adding left turn lanes, roundabouts, things like that. And these examples are taken from FHWA's proven safety countermeasures, and that's Federal Highway Administration. Next, is adopt new policies, procedures, and standards. So this presentation will be posted online if you want to go through and see what all of those are. But for the purpose of today, some of them include adding a safety toolbox in the street design manual with proven safety countermeasures, reevaluating and supplementing guidance for how we set speed limits, and adopting standards for traffic signal changes. Next, increase speed data collection and analysis, and conduct a citywide review of existing speed limits. Recommend changes, if as warranted, to speed limits by the end of 2024. And so that could result in some speed limits being lowered, but it could also result in some speed limits being raised, just depending on the context. But it's important that we make sure our speed limits keep up with our changing roadways and our changing city. So that way, as DPD does enforcement, it makes their job easier, and it ensures that we are encouraging drivers to drive safe speeds. And that's what speed limits are all about. They're intended to tell drivers what the safe speed is to operate in an area. So it's crucial that we continuously reevaluate these. Implement speed humps or cushions or raised crosswalks on local streets. Fund and implement sidewalks and bike facilities in the Sidewalk Master Plan and Bike Plan. Implement or install new or improved pedestrian crossings at locations that are identified by data. Continue to enhance the maintenance of street markings. Coordinate with TxDOT on making corridor safety improvements along state roadways, because many of the streets on our Hindrey network are state roadways, and seek funding to implement improvements on those roads. And then finally, implement safe routes to school improvements to improve the safety of walking and biking to and from schools. Now on to enforcement. So some of the things that we are already doing. DPD has a dedicated traffic enforcement squad made up of 25 to 30 motorcycle officers. They actively seek to ensure enforcement does not overburden minority populations, and Courts and Detention Services has a diversion program to provide alternatives to traffic fines. And these are all things that other cities have recommended in their visions or action plans, but we are already doing some of these things. So some of the draft recommendations include conducting high visibility enforcement along high-injury network corridors each quarter, targeting the most dangerous driving behaviors. So those behaviors that are identified as topic focus areas. Establish a speed enforcement program with monthly ongoing speed enforcement activities rotating through high-injury network corridors. Ensure that division enforcement plans prioritize the enforcement of dangerous driving behaviors and the enforcement at high crash locations. Provide consistent levels of enforcement across all DPD divisions to ensure that we are sending the message that reckless driving is not permitted anywhere in the city of Dallas. Work with courts and detention services to create graduated penalties, so that is increased penalties for repeat offenders that engage in the most dangerous driving behavior. Address challenges to speed enforcement. So that includes things like working with the Department of Transportation on challenges with prosecuting drivers who speed, and convening recurring discussions between DPD, Department of Transportation, and the city administrative judge to focus on fair and equitable enforcement. And lastly, for enforcement, address challenges to enforcing failure to yield to pedestrians violations, and increase education around the new state law SB 1055. Provide training for officers on immediate and advanced crash investigation to ensure that all categories are being fully captured, because that information is so crucial to doing these crash data analysis and doing the safety analysis. Incorporate Vision Zero materials in officer training, and expand and make permanent DPD's driving while intoxicated squad to provide more DWI enforcement. Now on to education. So draft recommendations here include align all traffic safety education and outreach in Dallas under the Vision Zero umbrella. Create a branded toolkit to ensure consistency across departments and that answers frequently asked questions. Convene interdisciplinary meetings to facilitate this coordinated outreach. Develop and implement a safety education campaign aimed at reducing speeding, failure to yield, and other forms of reckless driving. Increase awareness around the new state law SB 1055, which is stop for pedestrians. It is no longer yield for pedestrians in crosswalks. The state law is now that drivers must stop for pedestrians that are legally in crosswalks. Increase awareness around this using city-owned channels and things like variable message signs. Implement walking, biking, and safety education in schools. Increase brand recognition around Vision Zero. Develop Vision Zero signage that can be installed by the Department of Transportation and Public Works around Vision Zero projects. Prior to enforcement, conduct education by doing things like placing variable message signs and speed feedback trailers. And then finally, conduct surveys every few years to gauge public awareness of Vision Zero to see how well these measures are working. Next, coordination and legislation. So this is convening regular meetings of the Vision Zero Task Force to guide the initiation of the action plan and monitor the implementation. And then related to legislation, so work with other cities in Texas to effectuate lowering speed limits for residential streets. So that is lowering the de facto speed limit for residential streets to 25 miles an hour. That was identified as something that broadly members of the public were very, very supportive of in our first public survey. Now for evaluation. So create an online interactive map of crashes and projects to ensure we're being transparent, and that way people know that projects are going in areas where crashes are occurring. Publish an annual progress report. Continue our quarterly fatal and severe crash pattern evaluation. Compare hospital data, which we've already begun doing, to police crash reports to determine if we are undercounting certain populations. So an example of that is other cities have found that commonly lower income, non-English speaking populations and pedestrians are undercounted because oftentimes sometimes they don't want to call the police. And so they're able to get a ride to the emergency room. But then as a result, we might be undercounting some of these population groups and some of these populations in our efforts, and then not prioritizing them as much as we should be. And then finally, or conduct metrics so that we can evaluate safety projects and do before and after studies. And then add performance measures to Dallas 365 and the annual budget performance measures for DPD and the Department of Transportation. And here are some of the metrics to be tracked. They just include things like number of deaths and severe injuries, number of safety improvements, number of miles of new sidewalk, streets on the Hydra network that receive high visibility enforcement, awareness of Vision Zero, etc. All right, and lastly, I think, is equity. So things we're already doing is implementation of the City Adopted Connect Dallas Strategic Mobility Plan, and one of the driving principles of that plan is equity and safety. Another one is collection of crash data. So some draft recommendations include comparing hospital data, police reports, and others to ensure that we are properly capturing demographic data, integrating equity into the prioritization of countermeasures, that is improvements on the Hydra network, and ensuring enforcement is equitable and doesn't overburden minority populations. Okay, so almost to Q&A time. I think, Wayne, you might have just a couple more questions before we open it up.
Yeah, I got a few more questions to throw out. First one's going to be for you, actually. And so how will the project prioritization process be different after the implementation of the Vision Zero action plan? Or in other words, how will the Vision Zero approach be different than how the city works today?
So the first thing is that it's intended to allocate dedicated resources, really kind of for the first time, that are dedicated specifically for reducing fatal and severe injury crashes, to really targeting those things that will make the biggest impact on improving traffic safety. So that's one of the most significant ways it would be different. Another is that it would use data to determine how those resources would be spent, rather than being based solely on requests, and who knows who. It would really be looking at the data and taking almost a public health approach to this, to reducing these severe injuries and fatalities.
Thank you. I got a couple more. Next one's going to be for Albert, and just wanted to ask, how will DPD ensure that enforcement of the various Vision Zero initiatives is conducted in an equitable fashion?
I'm guessing that was directed for me. I'm here.
Yep, sorry about that. Yeah, sorry about that. Sorry.
That's okay. So, well, I think that we've got to make sure that we are looking at the data. I guess more than anything, we have to look at where the accidents are occurring, where the more severe accidents are occurring, and make sure that we are allocating those resources accordingly. I think that would take there's some juggling that has to be done between how we measure the data or hold the data up against the requests. I mean, there's a significant number of requests that come into our traffic division regularly, particularly in school zones. And while fortunately there may not be as many severe wrecks in these school zones where our children are crossing, it's equally important for us to apply resources to those locations and make sure that we're doing all that we can to deter any speeding or any reckless driving in those areas as well. So to the answer to the question, to be able to ensure that we're allocating those resources properly, I think we've got to commit to data first. That's really been our bread and butter in all other types of crimes. We've got to look at where the accidents are occurring, how they're occurring, any of the particulars about the accidents, and make sure that we're being strategic about when, the time, and the types of enforcement that we do, just make sure that we're curbing that behavior. So it's data led. That's really the name of the game these days. It's where the data puts us.
Yeah, fantastic. Just one more question for you, Ruben. Could you speak just a little bit to the need to create a culture of roadway safety in Dallas and what part DPD can do in the creation of that culture of safety?
Sure. I think when we talk about culture and changing culture, that's usually a multi-front approach. It's not anything that one entity is going to be able to accomplish on its own. But fortunately, in Dallas, I've said this many times, I think we are one of the uniquest cities to be able to change culture and really change trajectory because of how many groups are willing to come forward, how whether it's our business district, our faith organizations, neighborhood association, crime watch groups. There's so many people in this city that are willing to get involved, and that's really that's usually the biggest obstacle, and we don't really have that in Dallas. I mean, there are groups that are willing to come forward. They're willing to put their resources, their talents, at the forefront of just kind of understanding what the problem is and strategizing on how to make these changes, and then getting our message out. So much of what we do, I believe, in law enforcement is really just involves awareness. One of the, not to go off too far off of the subject of traffic, but when we look at Community Crime Watch, for example, Community Crime Watch is probably the single greatest crime fighting strategy that we've ever created in policing, not just in Dallas, but East Coast to the West Coast. Because what you do is you take a community and you teach them how to harden themselves as targets, how to be less likely to become a target based on the type of crime that's occurring in their neighborhood. So it's specific. The message is specific to that particular group. The types of crimes they're facing, whether it's car burglaries or robberies. We have to have the initiative of the community. They have to be willing to come forward and be part of the solution, and then use their influence to share that message to their neighbors, to their family members, to their children. Working collectively with the experts in that group, in this case it would be with their police departments, and being strategic on the right message. People have very limited time, and we can't eat them up with just a bunch of statistics. Sometimes it's got to be a good, concise message. I think when we do that collectively, using the community's influence, their willingness to get involved, our messaging, a multi-front approach, I think we can change. I think the possibilities are endless. And I think that's the way we go about changing a culture, right? And as it relates to reckless driving or speeding, even in this city.
Absolutely. It's great to hear. But so I got one more question to throw out before we get to. I saw there were a couple questions in the chat, and I just wanted to ask Emma. So based on your experience, you've mentioned that building partnerships is really important to your work with Mothers Against Drunk Driving. So could you talk about why it'll be really important for the city to take a partnership approach to Vision Zero rather than just going it completely alone?
Yes, absolutely. And it's just to stay on top of what the chief just said when it comes to collaborating as a community with coalitions, that we are more successful, at least I feel, when we partner together and put our resources together to educate our community and just work together, because some resources that I might have might not reach one community that another coalition has. And so I think we can extend our reach and be more successful when we can collaborate together.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists, of course. So we have a couple questions in the chat, right, Hortensia?
Yes, we do. So let me get to the first one here. It's for Ruben. How many new officers need to be added to the traffic division to actually enforce the traffic laws? How much would it cost? And has the council communicated a willingness to fund the necessary additional traffic officers?
Well, so just like in any organization that's been tasked with doing more with less, we are constantly moving our resources around to make sure that we're addressing the highest needs of the city. And right now, violent crime is probably our number one need. So as a result of trying to address and turn violent crime around, which you know, we've been managed to do in this city, different than really many other cities in the country have not been able to do that. We've allocated more officers into some of those higher crime districts, the investigating of those types of crimes. And so as a result, our traffic division has not been one of the places where we've been able to add extra resources. That being said, we do, when we find ourselves in that situation, what we do is we take our 25 or 30 motor officers, and again, looking at the data, we have to adjust their hours and make sure that we're not working in areas or at times when the data doesn't say we need to be there. So it's just causing us to be a little bit more strategic about how we allocate those resources. We have to apply some overtime opportunities to get additional officers, and fortunately we have a lot of officers who are willing to take those overtime assignments. And so we're fortunate in this city because our city council has approved 250 officers a year for the next 2 years, or a total of 500 additional officers in Dallas. This is probably one of the best examples we've seen of really, you know, funding our police department and helping us get those numbers back up to where we need to. So to sum all that up and answer, I don't want to give a specific amount of officers that we need in the traffic division, because there's always additional work that we could do. I think what we're doing right now is we are looking at the data. We're fine-tuning how we allocate our officers. We are putting our motorcycle officers. We've asked them to work a little bit later in the evenings. We've had them on freeways and you know, to try to calm down some of the road rage data that we're seeing, or some of the road rage incidents that we've seen. They're willing to take up the task and get it done for us, and we've had we think we've had success. I think that, combined with the council's willingness to approve those 250 officers a year for the next 2 years, it's going to put us in position to be able to build those numbers back up, and hopefully keep those trends going the direction that we need.
Great, thank you so much. I'm going to direct the next question to Catherine. It says, did you consider applying behavioral economics to incent drivers to change their behavior so that they would drive in a safer manner? And then it cites an article that talks about the former mayor of Bogota, Colombia, and his innovative approaches to changing behavior in his city.
No, we have not looked at that, but thank you for providing that resource. We'll take a look at it. And if you have others that you want to throw in the chat, that'd be great. So we'll take a look.
Okay, our last question is, how does DPD's traffic division coordinate enforcement activities with the 132 members of the Dallas County Sheriff's Traffic Unit?
Okay, so our highways are being enforced by Dallas County, in part by Dallas County. I think they cover, I have some numbers, that Dallas County covers about 74 miles of our Dallas freeways, and DPD covers the other 54 miles. Now, we occasionally get those supplemented with DPS officers when they're available. So we're kind of sharing the responsibilities with the county. Now, you know, a lot of times that, you know, that doesn't just involve our accidents, it's traffic enforcement as well. And I think the county is responsible for writing roughly 20,000 citations last year, where DPD has written about 120,000 citations. So we do we split the responsibilities on the freeway. We do meet with them regularly. We do have our crash system does interlink. So when we're looking at data, we're able to not only see the data and the results of the crashes that we've worked, but also those that DSO has worked as well. So when we talk about making sure that we're allocating resources in certain areas and recognizing those hotspots, our data is interlinking as well. So we're making sure that we're each assigning our resources in those places where they need to be.
Great, thank you. Does anyone else have a question they would like to drop into the chat? Or if you'd like to speak up, please raise your hand and I will unmute you. Okay, looks like we're getting one more question. Also, be sure that to this QR code that you see on the screen now, please be sure to provide feedback on the survey that is linked to, on this page, and so this will help us to determine, more recommendations. And also, please share this information with everyone you know, because we really do need to get everyone involved. Everyone is impacted by our safety on the road, so please make sure to share the link and information. We will be posting this presentation online on the Dallas Department of Transportation website under Vision Zero. If you go to dallascityhall.com/Vision Zero, you will be able also to access this information. Okay, here is our last question, or our current question. It is my understanding that DPD uses a policy of only ticketing speeders if they exceed the posted limit by at least 15 miles per hour. That means in a 30-mile-per-hour zone, the driver is going at least 45, very fast for a residential neighborhood. Any chance of changing this policy?
So I can tell you that I've not seen that policy and wouldn't approve of that policy. At 15 miles an hour it's first of all, it's not a policy. If you're violating the speed limit, then it's a violation if you're if you're any speed over it, whether that's 1 mile or 15 miles. I can tell you as a general practice, the officers will not write a citation unless someone is usually at least 5 miles over the speed limit. But there are so many other circumstances that would be taken into consideration as to whether or not they issued the citation. Distractions in the vehicle, other violations that occurred within that same episode, but we would not policy not writing a citation if the limit hadn't exceeded 15 miles an hour. That's not our policy.
And I'll add to that too, just from the Department of Transportation's perspective. One of the recommendations under engineering has to do with essentially helping not only DPD but also the courts to have greater confidence in our speed limits, that they are set to be what is reasonable and prudent, not arbitrary or anything else, but purely based on safety. But that it does involve us regularly reevaluating our speed limits and coordinating with our partners in the city to make sure that happens.
Okay, well, thank you. That is all the questions we have, so we will go ahead and close tonight's meeting. Again, we will be posting this information online, and we appreciate if you can, again, fill out the survey, provide feedback, let us know what you think and how we can help spread the word to more people. Also, please be sure to help us spread the word by sharing this link with others. And we do appreciate your time today, and thank you to all of our panelists, everyone who was part of this process, and we look forward to seeing you on the next meeting. We will be having another meeting on December 1st, and so we will be posting more information on our website. Again, please visit dallascityhall.com/Vision Zero to get more information. Thanks again and have a good evening.
Thank you.